Listen, I've been there. I've had pretty successful growth phases, and I've had ones that have left me questioning at the end of it, did I build any muscle? Now, in this video, I'm going to take you through 18 things. Yes, 18 things I did differently my last build that allowed me to go from this to this and add 4 inches onto my glutes. Number 1, I measured the right metrics. So a lot of people will say, can't I just take pictures? If I'm actually building muscle, isn't it going to show up in my physique? Yes, yeah, pictures are a great way to monitor changes that you see week to week, month to month. But I think where pictures go wrong is they don't tell the full story. And in the case of someone trying to build muscle and knowing that muscle building is going to take a long time, it can be pretty discouraging when you don't see big changes week to week. And realistically, I think what you need to do is have multiple ways that you can measure progress and even preventatively ensure that you are gaining muscle and not fat, which if you haven't caught my last video where I give you 3 signs that the weight you're gaining is fat and not muscle, I would definitely recommend checking that out. So pictures, yes, weekly. Measurements, so the circumference, and if we're talking about glutes, it's like we got to measure at the widest point. We got to measure the areas that we don't want to see get bigger. I also like calipers, so you can get an at-home tool. This can be something that's spring-loaded or electronic, but it'll give you a better sense of whether or not the pinchable fat is also going up. These metrics alongside scale weight are going to be pivotal, and I think honestly can offer a lot of reassurance for the individual who is skeptical as to whether they're building or not building. Number 2, daily scale tracking. So even on days where you feel uncomfortable, even on days where you know you're going to be a little bit heavier, whether it's due to inflammation, a higher sodium meal, or non-adherence, being consistent with your scale weight. This was huge, and this really allowed me to stay on point and be honest with myself if I wasn't being completely adherent. Number 3, calipers and measurements. Now, I kind of already explained this, but comparing the growth in terms of circumference relative to pinchable fat. Yes, body fat is going to come on when you're in a surplus, but the idea is we want to see it come on at a slower rate that in which you're building muscle. So having these and doing these each and every week in a consistent fashion can at least give you some objectives as to whether or not the weight that you're gaining is actually muscle or if it's just body fat. Number 4, consistent weekly check-ins. Now, I don't know about you, but a lot of people will say and be like, you know what, when I'm in prep, when I'm losing body fat, I'm on like horse blinders up. Nothing can break my focus. I'm not going to miss a meal. I'm not going to miss a session, and I'm certainly not going to miss a check-in. Now, check-ins in the off season in a growth phase, they're not fun. They're not as exciting because you're not getting that dopamine hit that you would get when you see the scale weight go down or when you see new lines in your physique. And quite frankly, they're the opposite because you're literally seeing the scale weight go up. You're seeing some of the lines fade, and you might not love how you feel at a heavier weight or a higher body fat. But this is what ultimately allowed me to make good progress and consistent progress because I could see if there was a high weigh-in, I could see it show up on my physique later that week. And realistically, if it was artificial, if it was muddied because of PMS, which I go into weight fluctuations versus hormonal imbalances and how that might manifest on the scale in a complete 60-minute solo episode if you're interested in that. But realistically, having that commitment, even though I'm not checking in with a coach, I'm checking in with myself, it made me more accountable and it made me want to be more honest about any discrepancies I had earlier in the week. Number 5, taking progress pictures even when I didn't want to. Let me tell you, I built for 16 weeks and I went from 137-ish to 152-ish, and it was uncomfortable. And there were points at 140 and 143 and 147 that I very much did not want to get into my underwear and bra and pose in front of the camera and hit my front poses and my back poses because frankly, I'm like, I know I'm not going to like what I see. I know it's not going to be super exciting. I know I'm not going to just wake up and have put a ton of muscle on, but These are important metrics to track, and I think having them collectively all together and having them in place on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, it makes it to where you can stay more present in your build, and also you can be more aware if weight is going up a little too quickly. Number 6, I prioritized my protein intake. So I told you, I started my build at 137, got up to 152. And throughout this build, I had my protein set anywhere from 150 to 165. And throughout this build, I made sure, even on days where I was having an untracked meal or I felt a little snacky and wanted to eat more than what was on my plan, I made sure, no matter what, that I was always hitting my protein. So even if I was going to go over my calories, I was going to be really diligent that I was never under eating protein intake. Protein is essential for repair and recovery and pertinent for muscle building. And that's one that if you're struggling with adherence and you're finding you're always going over your fats and your carbs and you're thinking, well, as long as I'm not going over my calories, it's okay, but you're consistently falling short of your protein, I would definitely take a closer look at your macro breakdown and figure out a way that, one, you can just be more adherent, but two, that you can make sure, no questions asked, under no circumstances are you falling short on your protein. Number 7, I stayed at my calories even when I was uncomfortable. And this is one that a lot of people, they're going to feel like, well, if I know that I'm gaining body fat, why wouldn't I pull down my food the following day? And realistically, sure, if you want to get really in the weeds with it, you can calorie cycle. But what I found was having a consistent amount of fuel was really helpful in terms of managing and maintaining training performance. Because even those days where I wasn't training, but I was in between sessions, I still needed fuel in order to recover. And as tempting as it might be when you're feeling discouraged, you're feeling like body fat's a little too high, you might want to just dip down to 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 calories just so that you feel like you're moving in the direction that you want to. But realistically, if this is hindering training performance, it's not the right call. And number 8, I was mindful when it came to untracked meals. And this is one that a lot of people, they're like, but I'm in off season, like I'm not prepping or I'm not in a fat loss phase, like shouldn't I be able to have the flexibility to eat whatever I want? And yes, no, you have that right, but realistically, even when body fat's a little bit higher, it's so easy to overdo the surplus with untracked meals. And this was something that I communicated with my boyfriend. I'm like, hey, if we're gonna go out to eat, I wanna make sure earlier in the day I'm for sure hitting my protein, but I also want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to assemble my calories in a way that account for however many calories I'm probably going to have in an untracked meal. So if that meant pulling back on fats and carbs a little bit earlier in the day, knowing that I'm going out to a nice dinner and I'm going to have a ribeye and I'm going to get plenty of fats in at that time, well, that made a lot more sense than just simply saying, okay, I'm going to eat my normal meals, I'm going to hit 2,000 calories, and then on top of that, go out and have a super high calorie meal that's highly palatable and frankly, so easy to overdo. And it's not about being overly restrictive, it's about being accountable. It's about considering that if really the goal is to minimize the amount of unnecessary fat gain during this phase, well, then that's gonna take some sacrifice. And trust me, I like food. I love highly palatable food, but I also know that hunger signaling, even at higher body fat, can be a little muted and a little dysregulated. So also being able to recognize like, hey, if you're someone who does like to snack and can easily overdo it, being extra cautious with these meals and the frequency in which you're doing these meals. Number 9, I did minimal cardio. Not zero, but not very much at all. And a large majority of my activity came from step count. So I was still mindful that I was active and not super sedentary, but I see a lot of times people will go into their off season, they won't reduce the cardio, but they'll continue to escalate the food, trying to find their maintenance in order to find a surplus. And realistically, we have to consider the systemic effects that come from doing a lot of cardio, specifically Stairmaster or running. And these are things that ultimately will have an impact on training performance. So in my opinion, if we're in a growth phase and the number one priority is to build, and yes, we want to do so in a way that is minimizing and mitigating most of the unnecessary fat gain. We don't want to gain at a high ratio of fat to muscle, sure. But That largely is going to come from adherence, food reporting, and eating the appropriate amount of food for what your energy needs are, which you kind of muddy up that equation the more cardio you do. Plus, if you're doing cardio, it will have an impact on your ability to train and likely make progress in terms of strength and performance week to week. Number 10, I structured my lower body sessions largely around my target muscle that I'm trying to grow, my glutes. So going into my sessions, I was very intentional with how I organized my sessions. I made sure that they were consistent and they were tracked, and I had continuity week to week. There weren't a lot of changes that were made unless absolutely indicated. And in contrast, you might be like, well, what did you do before? Before, I was still training lower 2-3 times a week, but I also had days in the interim on those non-glute days, non-lower days, where I was still training really, really hard and I was doing a lot of activity. Whereas this time I made sure that those 3 lower days, that was my tier 1, that was my top priority. And I made sure that everything was oriented around those sessions improving week to week. Number 11, I mastered pelvic stability and core bracing. Now, this was something that going into this build, I worked with Jordan, and the thing that he identified out the gate, he's like, your pelvic stability just isn't there. And that's ultimately making it harder for you to continue to progress at these movements that seemingly you're sufficient in, but in order to keep progressing, eventually this is going to hold you back if it's not already. And this is something that I see time and time again with clients. They will try to progress load, they'll try to progress rep range, but all the while feeling these aches and pains in their lower back while doing different hinge movements or squat patterns, ultimately either needing to take time off training, either needing to scale back volume, or just simply getting so frustrated and defeated by that lower back pump or lower back pain that they're not invested into continuing to progress week to week. Ultimately, the rib cage orientation to the pelvis is going to be the bottleneck for many people. And I found that by mastering this and also prioritizing it in every session, I was able to make consistent progress pretty much every week, if not weekly, bi-weekly. Number 12, I had a very performance-oriented mindset. So early on, I was very insistent. I'm like, but I'm not feeling my glutes on some of these movements. Is that a problem? Is that something I need to feel more in order to grow? And the thing is, sensation, stimulation of the muscle is not a strong indicator of hypertrophy. The thing that's largely going to correlate with building muscle is getting stronger. And even in the sense, like maybe not increasing weight, but lifting the same amount of weight with better execution, better technique, that is still progressive overload. And if you missed the training terminologies made simple, I have a full solo episode on this where I go into progressive overload intensity. This is one that I would definitely make sure, if you're not familiar with, that you check out. Some of you not gonna like this, some coaches gonna absolutely hate this. I didn't do any hip thrust. And yes, I'm someone who came from a background where I was hip thrusting 3 times a week. Previously, I was lifting a lot of weight. Like on the glute drive, I was pushing 400 pounds. And yes, I built muscle doing so, but the way I was organizing my training was very much oriented around the shortened position. This time though, I made sure to focus on mid-range and the lengthened position. So I didn't focus a lot on hip thrust, and quite literally, I didn't focus on hip thrust at all. And I was still able to build 4 inches on my glutes, which even me, I'm very surprised, because I was one of those people who just assumed in order to build nice juicy glutes, you have to hip thrust, and you have to hip thrust a lot. And with that being said, I'm not saying don't hip thrust. I'm not even saying to not have hip thrust in your program or to remove it. But what I am saying is that you can absolutely build really dense glutes and really good projection to your glutes without a hip thrust. Number 14, I emphasized hinging and squat patterns. And if you're not familiar, I'm a professional bikini competitor, and no, I don't exactly want to grow my legs, and that's a common concern I hear with people who are like, well, I don't want to overdo the split squats, I don't want to overdo the RDL because I don't want that thickness and bulkiness to the legs. I can tell you, I've taken measurements, I've taken calipers, I have hinged my ass off, which is, I don't know, a weird way to frame it because I've actually grown more ass hinging. I've really pushed the limit on both of these movements, and I can tell you it's resulted in really good depth and projection to my glutes. In addition, a lot of my movements were primarily oriented around loading the glute med. So this means on the B stance RDL or a split squat, largely using a contralateral load. Now, if you're not familiar with a contralateral load and what that is holding the dumbbell on the inside of the front foot, not on the outside. An ipsilateral load holding the dumbbell on the outside of the front foot will cause you to bias your adductor, which it's causing that muscle to stabilize, which is why holding the dumbbell on the inside of the front foot is going to meaningfully load the glute med. Now, other movements in my program, dumbbell step-ups or step-downs, if you want to refer to them that way, using a contralateral load, leg press with, yes, a glute bias, cable kickbacks, and abductions. That's largely what my training was made up from. Number 15, strategic volume. This is something that historically I didn't do. I would just try to do as much as I could every session, every single week, without really paying mind to, is this sustainable? And is this something that ultimately is impacting my ability to reach failure or close to failure the next session? Each session, I did roughly 10 to 14 working sets. And when I say working sets, I truly mean trying to take myself to either technical failure or muscular failure every single set. So this is something that it really helped me to delineate by being very specific that this proximity to failure is typically demonstrated or seen, if you're watching videos back, when you see a true drop off in rep speed. So actual rep velocity, those final few reps. Now, this is something that for the longest time, I thought I was training hard. I thought I was training intensely. And it wasn't until I was really granular with okay, every single set, I'm going to try to reach close to failure. I'm going to go until I see that drop off in rep speed. And then I'm going to do 1 or 2 or even 3 more, depending on positioning and my technical ability. Sure, with more complex movements like a B stance RDL or a split squat or a bilateral RDL, these are ones that very much you are going to fail technically before you fail from a muscular standpoint. Whereas if you look at isolation movements or movements that have heavy constraints in terms of you're not having to brace largely at the core, these are ones that you could take to muscular failure. So for instance, the cable kickback or an abduction, these are ones that I would try to hit muscular failure, the point in which I couldn't continue to produce the same reps due to the muscle fatiguing. Number 16, I accepted variability in some of my sessions without getting discouraged. Now, I was organizing my lower lifts Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and it was kind of something that my boyfriend and I, who also is doing my training, Jordan, Monday was our send it days. We were really trying to put up some big numbers, him and his lifts, me and mine. Now, after that session, Tuesday, I would feel really fucked up from it. Mentally, I would feel very drained because of the proximity to true failure I was taking myself to. So it wasn't uncommon to go in Wednesday and need to reduce load slightly. Now, for reference, it's if Monday, if I was doing a bilateral RDL with 90s or 100s, if I would go into my session Wednesday and maybe I wasn't able to do a bilateral RDL, maybe I was supposed to do a B stance, if I wasn't able to hit a top weight or I wasn't able to, be as stable given I was still recovering from Monday's session, I still trained. I still went in and did what I could. And instead, we shifted the focus on those interim days to what can you get better at today, even if it's not increasing load, even if it's not matching load. Can you work on your stability? Can you work on your function? Can you constrain this movement, making it to where you need less weight to hit proximity to failure using a longer tempo? And when there were weeks where I just matched the previous week's weight and I didn't add a rep or I didn't progress or even regressed slightly, I lost a rep, I didn't overthink it, I didn't panic, I trusted the plan, I stayed consistent, and I looked at whether or not there was anything I could do on the back end before the workout to get a better session the following week. Number 17, pre-workout nutrition. This was dialed in. This was something that was a non-negotiable. I made sure to have at least one meal if not 2 meals every single day before my lift. I made sure to have a good amount of fluid. So for me, I do struggle with water, and this was very much something like I would look at the clock and I'd be like, oh, man, I only have 2 hours before my lift. It's probably a good idea to chug a liter at this point, just to make sure that under no circumstances am I underhydrated. Now, 2 other things that I think are really important. I made sure I was consistent with my creatine, and I made sure I was consistent with my electrolytes. Now, it's not something I'm going to recommend you go buy some fancy BCAA stack or EAA stack or some electrolyte mix from a supplement company that's largely overpriced. I use Hydration IV. I like the little packs. I'll throw them into a bottle of water on the way to the gym. As long as you're consistent with your sodium, it's probably not something that you need to supplement with. But for those of you who are a little bit timid when it comes to electrolytes, know that if you are eliminating them, this will have a direct impact on your training performance. And number 18, I prioritized rest, sleep, and recovery. I made sure that I focused heavily on getting to bed on time. And if I had an early start to the next day, I would make sure that I was scaling that back in order to accommodate. And this was something that I wasn't bad with before, but I definitely didn't prioritize to the same extent I did this time. I can tell you that those days in between the Monday and Friday, because those were my 2 big sessions of the week, Saturday and Sunday, even if they were rest days, I was still very mindful in listening to my body and really thinking about if I had the opportunity to do a very strenuous activity, would it actually impact my ability to recover? Did I want to stack a ton of work on Saturdays and Sundays if I could help it? Not necessarily. Those were pretty chill days, and I made sure to scale back and really manage stress in a way that was unlike anything I did before. I also made sure going into sessions that I had a really close pulse on my recovery score. So some people will say that, yeah, I'm just going to look at my Whoop or my Apple Watch and see where I'm at in terms of recovery. I kind of went back to the analog version of this and just asked myself, like, how do I feel today? Is stress a little bit higher? Would I benefit from taking it easier this afternoon after my session? Can I make more time for myself this week? Can I segment it out so that I'm able to manage stress that for a lot of us is unavoidable? Largely, though, the sleep is going to be the big one. So if you're skimping on that, that is low-hanging fruit, and it absolutely is going to either help or hinder you in terms of your muscle building. Listen, I know a lot of you are probably like, yeah, but like, you talk about drugs. Did you use drugs? Did you use something to help, enhance the process? You guys, I was on TRT the entire time, and that was it. I didn't use GH, I didn't use any fat loss agents, which probably doesn't surprise you, but there were no ancillary anabolics in place in order to go from this to this. And yes, if I'd put an anabolic in place, could the results have been even better? Hopefully, yeah, I would presume so. But this is all to say, and I share that part with you because I think a lot of people are hung up on the fact that they need an anabolic in order to make serious progress. And in reality, I think what you need to come back to are the basics and largely taking a closer look at your training. So if this was helpful, if you enjoyed this, definitely let me know in the comments below. As always, I will see you in the next one.